The dust swirled across the barren landscape like a vengeful ghost as Abigail Owens clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her heart pounded against her ribs as the stagecoach disappeared over the horizon, taking with it the last of her hopes and the man who'd promised to love her forever. Abandoned at the Sweetwater County line with nothing but a small valise and the clothes on her back, she fought back the hot sting of tears that threatened to spill down her wind-chapped cheeks. Wyoming Territory, 1875. This desolate stretch of land seemed as unforgiving as her circumstances. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rugged terrain, and Abigail knew nightfall would bring dangers she wasn't prepared to face. The distant howl of a coyote sent a shiver up her spine, a cruel reminder of her vulnerability. She had trusted Thomas, believed his promises of a new life together in California. How could she have been so blind? He'd taken her savings, her dignity, and left her here, a boundary between counties that might as well have been the edge of the world. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her stiffen. Out here, a lone woman was easy prey. Abigail glanced around frantically for somewhere to hide, but the sparse landscape offered no refuge. Her fingers curled around a jagged rock, a pitiful defense, but better than nothing. A figure emerged through the golden haze of dust and sunlight. A man on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, slowed as it approached her. "Madam," the deep voice carried on the wind, "you all right out here?" Abigail straightened her spine, the rock still clutched in her palm. "I'm fine, thank you," she lied, her voice steadier than she expected. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, and as he stepped closer, Abigail could see him more clearly. Weathered skin bronzed by years under the harsh western sun, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. He wasn't the clean-cut type she was accustomed to back in Boston. "No offense, madam, but you don't look fine." His eyes darted to the rock in her hand, and a slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That won't do you much good against what roams these parts after dark." "I'm waiting for someone," she said. "Another lie. That stagecoach ain't coming back." He nodded in the direction the coach had disappeared. "I saw it pass by 10 minutes ago, going mighty fast for something supposed to be returning." Abigail's composure cracked. The rock fell from her hand, and she sank to her knees, the full weight of her situation crashing down upon her. She was alone, penniless, and miles from anywhere. The stranger knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Matt Xavier," he said. "Most folks just call me Matt. I own a ranch about an hour's ride from here." "Abigail Owens," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Miss Owens, I can't in good conscience leave you out here. Night's coming, and this land ain't forgiving to those who don't know its ways. I can't impose, it's not imposing if I'm offering." He stood and offered his hand. "You were left at the county line. I'm saying you'll cross it with me this time." Something in his steady gaze made Abigail believe him. Against every lesson of caution she'd been taught, she placed her gloved hand in his calloused palm and allowed him to help her to her feet. "I don't know what I can offer in return," she admitted. "Not asking for anything in return, Miss Owens, just doing what any decent man would do." Matt helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. The unexpected proximity to this stranger made Abigail tense, but as they began to ride, the rhythmic motion and the solid presence at her back became oddly comforting. "What brings you to Wyoming Territory?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. Abigail hesitated. The truth was too shameful, too raw. "A mistake," she finally said. "Most interesting journeys begin that way." They rode in silence after that, the landscape gradually shifting around them. The barren plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and the occasional cluster of cottonwoods. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, a beauty that seemed at odds with Abigail's despair. "That's my place," Matt said after they'd been riding for what felt like hours. Ahead, nestled in a valley protected by towering pines, stood a modest ranch. A main house built of sturdy logs, a barn and several outbuildings formed a rough circle. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows signs of home that made Abigail's chest ache with longing. As they approached, a dog came bounding toward them, barking excitedly. "That's Rusty," Matt explained. "Don't worry, his bark's worse than his bite." A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a bun, and her weathered face broke into a smile when she spotted them. "Matthew Xavier, you bringing home strays again?" she called out, her tone more amused than accusatory. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Miss Owens," Matt said as he dismounted and helped Abigail down. She was abandoned at the county line. "Miss Owens, this is Mrs. Caldwell, my housekeeper and the closest thing to a mother I've had since I was 12. Mrs. Caldwell's gaze softened as she took in Abigail's appearance. "You poor dear, come inside. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread cooling." The warmth of the house enveloped Abigail as she stepped inside. The main room was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, solid wooden furniture, and colorful quilts that added touches of brightness. It smelled of pine, fresh bread, and something indefinably homey. "You can wash up there," Mrs. Caldwell pointed to a basin of water on a side table. "I'll set another place at the table." As Abigail splashed cold water on her face and hands, she caught her reflection in a small mirror hanging on the wall. Her auburn hair had escaped its pins, falling in untidy waves around her face. Her green eyes were rimmed with red from unshed tears, and her normally fair complexion was smudged with dust from the journey. She looked nothing like the proper Boston lady who had set out for a new life just weeks earlier. "Here," Matt said, startling her. He held out a clean handkerchief. "It's not fancy, but it's clean. Thank you." Abigail took it, her fingers brushing against his. "For everything." "Haven't done much yet," he said with a shrug. "Come eat. Mrs. Caldwell makes the best venison stew this side of the Mississippi." The meal was indeed delicious, hearty, and filling after a day of uncertainty. Mrs. Caldwell kept the conversation light, talking about the ranch, the weather, and the latest gossip from the nearest town, Calistoga. "It's small," she explained, "but growing. Got a general store, a smithy, even a proper church now. Course, it's still Wyoming Territory, so don't expect anything like what you might be used to back east." Abigail looked up, surprised. "How did you know I'm from the east?" Mrs. Caldwell chuckled. "Your accent, dear, and those clothes weren't made for frontier life. After dinner, Mrs. Caldwell showed Abigail to a small but clean bedroom. "It was Matthew's mother's room," she explained, lighting a lamp on the bedside table. "He keeps it ready for guests, though we don't get many out here. His parents? Gone. His pa in the war, his ma to consumption a few years after. I was their neighbor, helped where I could. When she passed, I stayed on to keep house. Matthew was just a boy then." She patted the quilted coverlet. "Sleep well, dear. We'll figure things out in the morning." Left alone, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Through the small window, she could see stars scattered across the in-sky sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept replaying Thomas's final words. "Sorry, Abby, but a man's got to look out for himself in this world." A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Miss Owens," Matt's voice came through the door. "I brought you some clean clothes. They're my sister's from when she visits. They might be a bit big, but they'll do until we can get you something better." Abigail opened the door. Matt stood there, a small pile of folded clothing in his hands. "Your sister lives in Cheyenne with her husband, comes by a couple times a year." He handed her the clothes. "There's everything you might need." The slight flush on his cheeks made Abigail smile despite herself. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier." "Matt, please, Matt." She tested the name. "And I'm Abigail or Abby." "Abigail suits you better, I think." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. "Sleep well, Abigail." He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hallway. That night, wrapped in unfamiliar quilts in a strange house, Abigail slept better than she had in weeks. Morning came with the crow of a rooster and the smell of coffee and bacon. Abigail dressed in the borrowed clothes, a simple cotton dress that hung a bit loose on her slender frame, but was infinitely more practical than her travel suit. She twisted her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck and went to find her hosts. Mrs. Caldwell was alone in the kitchen, kneading dough on a floured table. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well." "Yes, thank you." Abigail glanced around. "Where is Mr. Xavier?" "Out checking the cattle. Always up before dawn, that one." She gestured to the stove. "Coffee's hot, and there's bacon and biscuits keeping warm in the oven. Help yourself." Abigail did, surprised by her own appetite. As she ate, Mrs. Caldwell continued her work, humming softly. "Mrs. Caldwell," Abigail began hesitantly, "I'm very grateful for the hospitality, but I can't impose indefinitely. Is there a stage that passes through Calistoga? I should try to get to California." The older woman turned, wiping flour from her hands. "California's a long way, and stages ain't cheap." "Do you have family there?" Abigail shook her head. "No, I thought I was going to." She swallowed hard. "I was engaged to be married. Thomas, he said he had prospects in San Francisco, but yesterday he took my money and left me at the county line." Mrs. Caldwell's expression darkened. "Some men aren't worth the air they breathe." She sat down across from Abigail. "What about back east? Family there? My parents died in a fire 3 years ago. I've been working as a governess. And now you're here with nothing." Mrs. Caldwell patted Abigail's hand. "Well, fate works in mysterious ways, dear. Perhaps this is where you're meant to be for now." The door opened, and Matt stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He removed his hat, revealing slightly damp dark hair. "Morning," he said, nodding to Abigail. "Hope you slept well." "I did, thank you." He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. "I've been thinking. Mrs. Miller over in Calistoga has been looking for help at the boarding house. It's respectable work, and she provides room and board." "I couldn't ask you to already planning to ride into town today," he cut in. "No trouble to take you along." Abigail felt a mix of relief and something like disappointment. Of course he wanted her gone. She was a burden, a problem dropped in his lap. "That's very kind," she said stiffly. Something in her tone made Matt look at her more closely. "Unless you'd rather stay here a few days. Get your bearings." "Oh, she should definitely stay a bit," Mrs. Caldwell interjected. "Poor thing's been through an ordeal. Besides, Matthew, you said yourself the vegetable garden needs tending, and I could use help with the preserving. Harvest season's upon us." Matt raised an eyebrow at his housekeeper's enthusiasm but nodded. "It's settled then. Stay as long as you need, Abigail." "I wouldn't want to be a burden," she insisted. "You heard Mrs. Caldwell. We could use the help." He drained his coffee. "I still need to go to town, though. Need anything while I'm there, Mrs. Caldwell rattled off a list of supplies, while Abigail sat quietly, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. After Matt left, Mrs. Caldwell showed Abigail around the ranch. The main house was modest but well-built, with 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a great room with a stone fireplace. Behind the house was a kitchen garden, somewhat neglected as Mrs. Caldwell had mentioned, but still producing tomatoes, beans, carrots, and herbs. A chicken coop housed a dozen hens and 1 imperious rooster. The barn housed horses, including Matt's chestnut stallion, Thunder, and 2 milk cows. "Matthew runs about 300 head of cattle," Mrs. Caldwell explained. "Not the biggest spread in the territory, but respectable. His pa started with just 50 head. He's done well for himself," Abigail observed, "worked hard for it." "That boy was breaking horses at 14, running the ranch by 16. Pride shone in the older woman's eyes. "Never complains, never gives up." As the day progressed, Abigail found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. She weeded the garden, gathered eggs, and helped Mrs. Caldwell prepare vegetables for pickling. The work was physical but satisfying, so different from the constraints of her life as a governess, where she was always conscious of her deportment and speech. Matt returned late in the afternoon, his horse loaded with supplies. Abigail watched from the porch as he unloaded flour sacks, coffee, sugar, and other necessities. "Need help?" she called. He looked up, momentarily surprised to see her. "I've got it, thanks," but Abigail was already crossing the yard. "I've been sitting all afternoon shelling peas. I could use the exercise." A smile quirked the corner of his mouth. "Suit yourself." He handed her a small package. "This is for you." Surprised, Abigail unwrapped the brown paper to find a hairbrush, a small bottle of lavender water, and a bar of soap. Simple necessities, but the thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. I thought you might need. Well, I wasn't sure what ladies require, but Mrs. Miller at the general store helped me choose. It's perfect, Abigail said softly. Thank you. Their eyes met, and Abigail felt a strange flutter in her chest. She quickly looked away. I should help Mrs. Caldwell with dinner. Over the next few days, Abigail fell into a routine at the Xavier Ranch. Mornings were spent helping Mrs. Caldwell with household chores, afternoons in the garden, or assisting with whatever seasonal task needed attention. She saw little of Matt, who left at dawn each day to work with his cattle and hired hands, returning only at dusk. On her fourth day at the ranch, Abigail was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the direction of the corral. She hurried toward the sound and found Matt and two other men attempting to break a wild Mustang. The horse was magnificent midnight black with a white blaze down its face and clearly unhappy about its captivity. It bucked and reared, nearly throwing one of the men through the fence. Careful, Pete, Matt called. He's a fighter. Abigail watched, mesmerized, as Matt approached the horse, speaking in low, soothing tones. The Mustang's ears flicked forward, listening. Slowly, Matt extended his hand, palm flat. The horse snorted, stamped, but didn't retreat. For several tense moments, man and beast regarded each other, then, miraculously, the horse stretched its neck and nudged Matt's palm. That's it, Matt murmured. Nobody's going to hurt you. The moment was broken when one of the other men moved too quickly. The Mustang spooked, rearing up with a terrified whinny. Its hooves caught Matt's shoulder, sending him sprawling to the ground. Before the others could react, the horse bolted, crashing through the corral fence and galloping toward freedom. Matt. Abigail rushed forward as the men helped him to his feet. Blood stained his shirt where the horse's hoof had connected. I'm all right, he insisted, though his grimace told another story. You're not, Abigail said firmly. That needs tending. Come to the house. To her surprise, he didn't argue. In the kitchen, she had him sit at the table while she heated water and gathered clean cloths. Mrs. Caldwell was in town for the day, visiting a friend. Take off your shirt, Abigail instructed, her governess voice emerging unconsciously. Matt raised an eyebrow but complied, wincing as he peeled the bloodied fabric away from the wound. Abigail tried to maintain her professional demeanor, but the sight of his bare chest, broad and muscled from years of hard work, made her cheeks warm. It's not deep, she said, carefully cleaning the gash on his shoulder, but it will need stitches to heal properly. You know how to do that. I've had some experience. My father was a doctor. He insisted I learn basic medical skills. Matt studied her face. A doctor's daughter who became a governess. There's more to your story than you've told, Abigail Owens. Perhaps. She threaded a needle Mrs. Caldwell kept in her sewing basket. This will hurt. I've had worse. His stoicism impressed her. As she stitched the wound, her fingers steady despite her awareness of his proximity, Matt barely flinched. Why did you leave Boston? He asked after a few minutes of silence. Abigail's hands stilled momentarily. My parents died. The house was sold to pay debts. I had nowhere else to go. And this Thomas, the one who left you at the county line. He was a business associate of the family I worked for. Charming, attentive, her voice hardened. A liar, as it turns out. His loss, Matt said quietly. Abigail looked up, startled by the intensity in his gray eyes. For a heartbeat, neither moved. There, she said finally, cutting the thread. Keep it clean, you're lucky it wasn't worse. Thanks to you, it won't be. He reached for his shirt, then reconsidered. This is ruined, I should get a clean one. Abigail nodded, suddenly flustered. Of course. I'll make some coffee. Later, when Mrs. Caldwell returned from town, she took one look at Matt's bandaged shoulder and Abigail's pink cheeks and raised a knowing eyebrow but said nothing. That evening after dinner, Matt surprised Abigail by asking her to join him on the porch. The night was clear, stars spread across the vast Wyoming sky like diamonds on velvet. It's beautiful, Abigail said, wrapping a shawl Mrs. Caldwell had lent her around her shoulders against the evening chill. Different from Boston, I imagine. Everything here is bigger, more open. Matt leaned against the porch railing. That Mustang today, he's been running wild in these parts for years. Local legend says he can't be caught. Yet you almost had him. Almost. A rueful smile touched his lips. Some things aren't meant to be tamed. You'll try again, maybe. Or maybe he's earned his freedom. He glanced at her. What about you, Abigail? What do you want now that your California plans have changed? It was a question she'd been avoiding. I don't know. I have no money, no connections out here. The position at the boarding house you mentioned. It's still available if you want it. Do you want me to take it? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Matt turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the moonlight. I want you to do what makes you happy. But I won't pretend I'd be sorry if you decided to stay in the area. The admission hung between them, fraught with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. I should turn in, Abigail said softly. Good night, Matt. Good night, Abigail. As she lay in bed that night, Abigail's thoughts were a confused jumble. She had come west with dreams of a new beginning, but not like this. Not in a remote Wyoming ranch with a man she barely knew, yet somehow trusted completely. It was foolish to think there could be anything between them. She had been wrong about Thomas, catastrophically wrong. How could she trust her judgment again so soon? Yet there was something about Matt Xavier that felt different. He was straightforward, honest in a way that Thomas never had been. And when he looked at her, she felt seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in her life. The next morning, Abigail woke with a sense of purpose. If she was to stay in Wyoming, even temporarily, she needed to establish herself, to have some independence. After breakfast, she approached Matt as he was preparing to head out for the day. I'd like to go into town with you next time you go, she said. I should meet Mrs. Miller about the boarding house position. Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment, perhaps, but he nodded. I need to go tomorrow. We can leave after breakfast. The ride to Calistoga took about an hour. It was the longest time Abigail had spent alone with Matt, and conversation flowed more easily than she expected. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his sister Margaret who had married a banker in Cheyenne, about his dreams of expanding his herd and building a larger house someday. What about you? He asked. What did little Abigail Owens dream of becoming? A teacher, actually, she admitted. I always loved learning, sharing knowledge. Being a governess was close, but not quite the same. Why not a teacher now? I never completed my education. After my parents died, there was no money for that. Calistoga has a schoolhouse, Matt said, but no permanent teacher. Different townsfolk take turns teaching basics to the children. Abigail's interest was piqued. Really? How many children? Maybe 20, of various ages. More when the ranching families can spare their kids from chores. The idea took root in her mind, a way to be useful, to build a life here. But first, she needed stable employment and a place to stay. Calistoga was indeed small, as Mrs. Caldwell had warned, but it had a certain frontier charm. The main street consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small church, a blacksmith, and several other businesses. The boarding house was a two-story building painted a fading yellow, with a sign that read, Miller's Boarding House Clean Rooms, Honest Rates. Mrs. Miller proved to be a plump, efficient woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner that reminded Abigail of her former headmistress. So you're the gal Matthew rescued, she said, looking Abigail up and down. He said you might be interested in working here. Yes, madam, I'm a hard worker and learn quickly. Ever worked in a boarding house before? No, but I've managed households as a governess and know how to cook, clean, and mend. Mrs. Miller nodded approvingly. Hours are long, pays fair. You'd get room and board plus $2 a week, Sundays off unless we're especially busy. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When would you want me to begin? Can start tomorrow if you'd like. Got a room on the second floor, small but private. Matt had been silent during this exchange, but now he stepped forward. Mrs. Miller, would you mind if I showed Abigail around town before we head back to the ranch? She'll need to know where things are if she's going to be living here. Course not. You two run along. I've got rooms to see to. Outside, Abigail took a deep breath. Well, that's settled. You're sure about this? Matt's expression was unreadable. I need to support myself, Matt. I can't keep imposing on your hospitality. You're not imposing, he sighed. But I understand. Come on, let me show you Calistoga's finest establishments. The tour didn't take long. The general store was well stocked for a frontier town, the proprietor greeting Matt warmly. The saloon they passed by not a place for a lady, Matt explained, and the church was a simple white building with a small cemetery behind it. As they walked, several townspeople greeted Matt, eyeing Abigail with undisguised curiosity. A few women nodded politely, though their expressions were reserved. "They're wondering who I am," Abigail murmured. "Small towns. Everyone wants to know everyone's business." "And what am I to you, Matt Xavier?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He stopped walking, turning to face her on the dusty street. "You're—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "You're someone I respect, someone I enjoy knowing." It wasn't a declaration of anything deeper, and Abigail told herself the twinge of disappointment she felt was ridiculous. "I'm glad we met," she said simply. "Even though it was because some fool abandoned you at the county line." A smile tugged at her lips. "Even then." Their last stop was the schoolhouse, a one-room building at the edge of town. It was empty, the children presumably home for the summer. "It's not much," Matt said, pushing open the door, "but it's got potential." The interior was sparse wooden desks, a larger desk at the front for the teacher, a blackboard, and a few bookshelves containing a meager collection of books. "They need more books," Abigail said immediately, "and maps." "How can children learn geography without maps?" Matt chuckled. "Already planning improvements. It's just habit. I always took my responsibilities as a governess seriously." "You'd make a good teacher, Abigail." She touched one of the desks, imagining eager young minds ready to learn. "Perhaps someday. First, I need to establish myself here." As they rode back to the ranch, Abigail felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief at having secured a position, anticipation for this new chapter, and an undefined sadness at the thought of leaving the Xavier Ranch, which had become a sanctuary in her short time there. "I'll help you move your things tomorrow," Matt said as they approached the ranch. "Not that you have much, just what you've kindly given me," Abigail agreed. "I should repay you for the clothes and no." His tone brooked no argument. "Consider it a welcome to Wyoming gift." That evening, Abigail helped Mrs. Caldwell prepare a special dinner: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert. The older woman was visibly disappointed to learn of Abigail's imminent departure. "I was hoping you might stay on," she said as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "It's been nice having another woman around. I'll only be in town," Abigail reassured her. "I'm sure we'll see each other often." Mrs. Caldwell gave her a knowing look. "I hope so, dear, for everyone's sake." Dinner was a somewhat subdued affair, though Matt made an effort to keep the conversation light, telling amusing stories about local characters Abigail would soon meet in Calistoga. After they'd eaten, Matt surprised her by producing a small package from his pocket. "A going-away present," he said, pushing it across the table. Abigail unwrapped it to find a small leather-bound journal and a pencil. "Matt, it's lovely, but you've already given me so much. Thought you might want to write down your observations about Wyoming life. For when you're famous one day." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." Later, as she packed her few belongings, Abigail opened the journal and wrote her first entry: Wyoming Territory, 1875. "I came west seeking one life and have found the possibility of another. I do not yet know what the future holds, but for the first time in years I feel hope. Tomorrow I begin anew in Calistoga, a town I had never heard of a week ago. The path forward is uncertain but no longer frightening." She paused, then added, "MX continues to surprise me with his kindness. I find myself thinking of him at odd moments. This is unwise given my recent experience with Thomas, yet I cannot seem to help it. I must be cautious with my heart, for I cannot bear to be a fool twice." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Matt loaded Abigail's small valise onto his horse, along with a basket Mrs. Caldwell had prepared with bread, preserves, and a small jar of honey. "For your new home," the housekeeper said, embracing Abigail warmly. "And you must come for Sunday dinner whenever you can." "I will," Abigail promised, unexpectedly emotional at leaving this place that had been her refuge. The ride to town was quieter than the previous day, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the boarding house, Abigail steeled herself for the goodbyes to come. Mrs. Miller showed Abigail to her room, indeed small, but clean and private as promised. A narrow bed, a washstand, a small chest of drawers, and a hook on the wall for her clothes were the only furnishings. "It's perfect," Abigail said, meaning it. After the uncertainty of the past weeks, having a space of her own earned through honest work felt like a luxury. "I'll leave you to settle in," Mrs. Miller said. "Come down to the kitchen when you're ready. I'll show you your duties." When she had gone, Matt placed Abigail's valise on the bed. "It's not much of a view," he said, glancing at the small window that overlooked an alleyway. "It's a start." They stood awkwardly, neither quite ready for goodbye. "Abigail, you should go," she interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say or what she might reveal. "I'm sure you have work to do at the ranch," he nodded, disappointment briefly crossing his features. "Right. Well, good luck then. Thank you for everything." He moved to leave, then paused at the door. "Sunday dinner. Mrs. Caldwell will be expecting you." "I'll be there," she promised. And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway of the boarding house, taking with him a piece of Abigail's heart she hadn't intended to give. Life at Miller's boarding house quickly fell into a routine. Abigail's days began before dawn, helping prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly single men who worked in town or traveling salesmen passing through. Mornings were spent cleaning rooms, changing linens, and doing laundry. Afternoons involved preparing dinner, mending, and whatever other tasks Mrs. Miller assigned. The work was harder physically than being a governess, but in many ways less draining. Mrs. Miller proved to be a fair employer, stern but not unkind. She was impressed with Abigail's efficiency and attention to detail, and by the end of the first week, had increased her responsibilities to include managing the accounts, a task Abigail excelled at thanks to her education. "You've got a good head for figures," Mrs. Miller remarked. "Most girls your age can barely add 2 and 2. My father believed in education for both sexes," Abigail explained. "He said a woman with a mind is a woman who can never truly be poor." As promised, Abigail rode out to the Xavier Ranch for Sunday dinner. Matt sent one of his hands, Pete, to fetch her in a wagon, explaining in a note that he had business to attend to but would see her at dinner. The reunion with Mrs. Caldwell was warm, and Abigail found herself missing the ranch more than she'd expected. The housekeeper listened eagerly to Abigail's stories of boarding house life. "And how are the men treating you?" she asked pointedly. "With respect," Abigail assured her. "Mrs. Miller runs a tight ship. No one would dare act improperly." "Good. Matthew would have something to say if they didn't." Before Abigail could respond to that intriguing statement, the man himself arrived. He looked tired but brightened visibly when he saw her. "Abigail, you came? I promised I would." Dinner was a lively affair, with Matt telling stories of a cattle buyer from Cheyenne who had visited the ranch that morning. "Offered a fair price," he said. "If the sale goes through, I might be able to start on that new house I've been planning." "That's wonderful," Abigail said sincerely. "You deserve it, after all your hard work." Something passed between them then, a current of understanding that needed no words. Mrs. Caldwell, observing them, smiled to herself. As the weeks passed, Abigail found herself settling into life in Calistoga. The townspeople gradually accepted her, moving from polite nods to friendly conversations. She attended church each Sunday, joined the ladies' sewing circle, and even began tutoring a few children whose parents wanted them to have additional education. Her weekly visits to the Xavier Ranch became a cherished ritual. Sometimes Matt would ride into town during the week as well, ostensibly on business, but he always found time to stop by the boarding house, often bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh honey from his hives, wildflowers he claimed just happened to be growing along his path. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Abigail realized with a start that she had been in Wyoming for nearly 3 months. The pain of Thomas's betrayal had faded, replaced by a growing affection for this rugged land, and its people, one person in particular. It was during the Harvest Festival in early October that everything changed. The entire town gathered for a day of celebration, with food, music, games, and a dance in the evening. "Abigail, wearing a new dress she had saved for a modest blue calico that nonetheless flattered her figure more than her usual work clothes, found herself the object of several men's attention. She danced politely with the blacksmith, the general store owner's son, and even the young bank clerk who had recently arrived from Denver. But her eyes kept straying to the edge of the gathering, where Matt stood talking with other ranchers, occasionally glancing her way. When the musicians took a break, Abigail stepped outside for fresh air. The night was cool, stars brilliant overhead. "Enjoying yourself," Matt's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him leaning against a post, hat in hand. "Yes, it's a lovely celebration. You're popular with the local men. Hiram Roberts looked ready to propose during that last dance." Abigail laughed. "Hardly. He was telling me about his mother's prize chickens." "A fascinating topic." Matt stepped closer. "You look beautiful tonight, Abigail." The compliment, delivered in his straightforward way, made her heart skip. "Thank you. Would you dance with me when the music starts again?" "I'd like that." The band struck up a slow waltz, and Matt led her back inside, one hand warm at the small of her back. As they joined the other couples on the makeshift dance floor, Abigail was acutely aware of the townspeople watching them with interest. "Everyone's staring," she murmured as Matt's arms slipped around her waist. "Let them," he replied, drawing her slightly closer than was strictly proper. "I've wanted to dance with you all evening. Why didn't you ask sooner?" "Wasn't sure you'd say yes." His gray eyes held hers. "You've been careful to keep your distance, Abigail." It was true. Despite their growing friendship, she had maintained certain boundaries, afraid to trust her heart again so soon. "I made a terrible mistake with Thomas," she admitted softly. "I thought I knew him, but I was wrong. I'm not Thomas." The simple statement contained a wealth of meaning. "No," she agreed, "you're not." They danced in silence after that, the music wrapping around them like a cocoon. Abigail felt something shifting between them, walls carefully constructed beginning to crumble. Later, as Matt was walking her back to the boarding house, an approaching rider interrupted their quiet conversation. The man was dusty from the trail, his horse lathered with sweat. "Matt Xavier?" he called, reining in beside them. "That's me," Matt replied, instantly alert. "Message from Cheyenne." The rider handed over an envelope, said it was urgent. Matt tore it open, his expression darkening as he read. "It's from my sister. Her husband's been injured in a banking accident. She needs me to come right away." "Of course you must go," Abigail said immediately. "I'll leave at first light." He turned to the messenger. "Thank you. There's a room at the boarding house if you need rest before heading back." After the rider continued toward the saloon, Matt tucked the letter inside his jacket. "I'm sorry, Abigail. I don't know how long I'll be gone." "Your sister needs you. Family comes first." She touched his arm gently. "I hope her husband recovers quickly. So do I." He hesitated, then took her hand in his. "Will you write to me? I'll send my sister's address when I arrive." "Yes," she promised, touched by the request. He walked her the rest of the way in silence, both aware of the conversation that had been interrupted, words that might have been spoken now held in abeyance. At her door, Matt lingered. "Abigail, when I return." "I'll be here," she said simply. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with that promise. Then, surprising her, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Good night." "Good night, Matt. Travel safely." Inside her room, Abigail pressed her fingers to the spot his lips had touched, her heart racing with possibilities. True to his word, Matt left at dawn. Abigail, who had barely slept, watched from her window as he rode out of town, his broad shoulders straight, his horse's hooves stirring up dust in the early morning light. 3 days later, a letter arrived from Cheyenne. "Dear Abigail, I arrived safely. Margaret sends her thanks for your good wishes. James's injuries are serious but not life-threatening. A safe fell during an attempted robbery, pinning his leg. The doctors say he'll walk again but with a limp. Margaret is expecting a child in the spring, which complicates matters. I've hired extra help at the ranch so I can stay as long as needed. Calistoga seems strangely empty without you, though I'm the one who left. Is that peculiar? Perhaps absence truly does make the heart grow fonder, as they say. Tell Mrs. Miller not to let Hiram Roberts call on you too often. Yours, Matt." Abigail read the letter several times, smiling at his subtle jealousy and the hint of deeper feelings. She penned a reply that evening, careful not to be too forward, but allowing some of her affection to show through her words. Life in Matt's absence settled into a quieter routine. Abigail continued her work at the boarding house, but also began spending more time at the schoolhouse. The town council, impressed by the results of her tutoring, had approached her about taking on teaching duties more formally. "We can't pay much," Mayor Wilson explained. $5 a week for 3 days of teaching. Most families need their older children for ranch work, but the young ones could attend regularly. It was less than she earned at the boarding house, but the work would be more fulfilling. "I'd need to continue at Mrs. Miller's part-time," she said. "Of course, we understand you need to make a living." Mrs. Miller, when consulted, was surprisingly supportive. "Been thinking we should hire another girl anyway," she said. "Business is picking up. You could oversee the accounts and help with dinners, leave the heavy cleaning to someone younger." And so, by November, Abigail found herself dividing her time between the boarding house and the schoolhouse, her days full and purposeful. She corresponded regularly with Matt, whose stay in Cheyenne extended as his brother-in-law's recovery proved slower than expected. "James insists I return to the ranch," he wrote in late November, "but I cannot leave Margaret alone in her condition, especially with him still bedridden. I've missed the cattle sale I was planning, but Pete reports all is well at home. Mrs. Caldwell sends her love and says you must still come for Sunday dinners, even without me there to escort you." Abigail did, finding comfort in the familiar warmth of the ranch house and Mrs. Caldwell's motherly affection. Sometimes she would sit on the porch afterward, imagining Matt returning, rehearsing what she might say when he did. As winter descended on Wyoming, blanketing the landscape in snow, Abigail found herself busier than ever. The school term was in full swing, with 15 regular students ranging from 6 to 12 years old. She had managed to secure donations for new books and even a globe, and the children were making remarkable progress. At the boarding house, she now supervised a young woman named Sarah, who had taken over most of the physical labor, while Abigail handled the accounts, correspondence, and overall management when Mrs. Miller visited her sister in Laramie. Christmas approached, bringing with it a flurry of preparations. The ladies' sewing circle, which Abigail had joined shortly after arriving in Calistoga, organized a gift exchange for the town's children. The schoolhouse was decorated with paper chains and pine boughs, and Abigail planned a special Christmas recitation for her students to perform for their parents. Matt's letters became more infrequent as the weather worsened, mail service becoming unreliable in the heavy snows. His last note, received in mid-December, was brief but poignant. "Dear Abigail, the passes are likely to close soon, so this may be my last letter until spring. James is walking now with crutches. Margaret's spirits are good, though the baby is making her uncomfortable. I find myself thinking of you constantly. The dance we shared, the conversations by the fire at the ranch, even our first meeting at the county line. I never imagined that finding a stranded woman would change my life so completely. I hope to return before the worst of winter, but cannot make promises. Know that you are in my thoughts always. Yours, Matt." Abigail kept the letter under her pillow, reading it each night before sleep. She had not expected to find love again so soon after Thomas's betrayal, had in fact been determined to guard her heart. Yet Matt Xavier had somehow slipped past her defenses, becoming essential to her happiness in a way Thomas never had. Christmas Eve arrived with a heavy snowfall that transformed Calistoga into a wonderland of white. Abigail attended the church service, then joined other townspeople for a communal dinner in the town hall. She had made friends during her months in Wyoming, good people who had accepted her into their community, yet she felt Matt's absence keenly. As the evening wound down, Abigail declined offers to join various families for further celebration, preferring to return to her room at the boarding house. The streets were quiet, most people already home with loved ones, lamps glowing warmly through frost-covered windows. She had just turned onto the boardwalk leading to Mrs. Miller's when she noticed a figure approaching from the direction of the livery stable. Something about the silhouette made her heart race, the broad shoulders, the confident stride. "Matt," she called, hardly daring to believe it. The figure stopped, then quickened its pace. Abigail. And then he was there, snow dusting his hat and coat, his face reddened from cold but his eyes warm as they met hers. "You're here," she breathed. Howe rode ahead of the storm, got in just before they closed the pass. He removed his gloves, reaching out to touch her cheek as if to confirm she was real. "Couldn't bear the thought of Christmas without seeing you." Abigail stepped closer, all caution forgotten. "I missed you. I missed you more." His smile was tender. "I've had a lot of time to think in Cheyenne. About what I want, about who I want to spend my life with," her breath caught. "And what did you decide?" Instead of answering, Matt reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I had this made in Cheyenne. Was going to wait for the right moment, but seeing you now, I can't think of a better time." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond that caught the moonlight. "Abigail Owens, I knew from the moment I found you at that county line that you were someone special. I didn't know then that you would become the most important person in my life, but I know it now. I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Matthew Xavier." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Later, after Mrs. Miller had been informed of their engagement, her response: "About time, if you ask me." They sat together in the boarding house parlor, plans spilling out between kisses. "Spring wedding," Matt suggested. "April, perhaps. After the mud season, but before you're too busy with the cattle." "And the school, will you continue teaching? If you don't mind, I've grown to love it." "I would never ask you to give up something that brings you joy." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Besides, our children will need a good education." "Children," Abigail smiled. "You're planning far ahead." "I plan to grow old with you, Abigail Owens. That requires long-term thinking." As snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Calistoga in peaceful white, Abigail marveled at the twists of fate that had brought her here. Thomas abandoning her at the county line had seemed like the end of her dreams, but it had in fact been the beginning of something far more precious. "What are you thinking?" Matt asked, noting her introspective expression. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied. "If Thomas hadn't left me there, you would never have found me." "Then I owe the man a debt," Matt said, drawing her closer, "though I still might punch him if I ever meet him." Abigail laughed, her heart full. "Merry Christmas, Matt. Merry Christmas, my love. The first of many we'll share." The wedding of Matthew Xavier and Abigail Owens was held on a perfect April day in 1876, with all of Calistoga in attendance. The church was decorated with wildflowers gathered by Abigail's students and Mrs. Caldwell, weeping openly, declared it the happiest day of her life since Matthew's birth. Margaret, Matt's sister, had traveled from Cheyenne with her husband James, who walked with a cane but was otherwise recovered, and their newborn son Robert. She embraced Abigail warmly, declaring, "I've always wanted a sister, and now I have one." The townspeople had embraced the romance wholeheartedly, the handsome rancher and the schoolteacher who had arrived with nothing but had won their respect with her hard work and gentle spirit. Mayor Wilson himself presided over the ceremony, his usual gruff demeanor softened for the occasion. Abigail wore a gown of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Miller and the ladies of the sewing circle had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Matt, uncharacteristically nervous, fumbled the ring but recovered with a laugh that set everyone at ease. "I, Matthew, take you, Abigail, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady as he gazed into her eyes. "I promise to love and cherish you, to protect and provide for you, to be faithful and true for all the days of my life." Abigail's vows were equally heartfelt, her voice only trembling slightly as she pledged her love and commitment. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming," Mayor Wilson proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Matt did so with enthusiasm, to the cheers and applause of the assembled guests. The celebration continued at the ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard and a dance floor constructed for the occasion. Mrs. Caldwell had outdone herself with the feast, assisted by women from town who had each contributed a dish. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the land, Matt led Abigail away from the festivities to a hill overlooking the ranch. "I wanted to show you something," he said, gesturing to a cleared area where foundation stones had been laid. "The new house. It will be ready by fall, God willing." "It's perfect," Abigail said, imagining their future home. "How many bedrooms?" "4," Matt replied with a smile. "Ambitious, I know. Not too ambitious." She leaned against him, his arm automatically encircling her waist. "I always wanted siblings growing up. Our children should have that gift." He kissed her temple. "Are you happy, Mrs. Xavier?" "Happier than I ever imagined possible." She turned in his arms, facing him fully. "When Thomas left me at that county line, I thought my life was over. I had no idea it was just beginning." "You crossed that line with me," Matt said softly. "And I intend to make sure you never regret it." As they rejoined the celebration, greeting friends and neighbors, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Abigail felt a profound sense of belonging. This place, this harsh, beautiful, challenging land had become home. And the man by her side, who had found her at her lowest moment and seen her worth, had become her heart's true companion. The months that followed were a time of adjustment and joy. Abigail continued teaching while helping Matt and the hired hands build their new home. She learned to ride properly, to manage the household accounts, and to navigate the complexities of being a rancher's wife. The new house was completed in September, just as Matt had promised. A spacious two-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides, large windows to capture the Wyoming light, and the 4 bedrooms they had planned for their future family. Mrs. Caldwell, who had initially worried about being replaced, was delighted when Abigail insisted she remain an essential part of their household. "This ranch would fall apart without you," Abigail told her sincerely. "Besides, when the children come, I'll need your wisdom more than ever." That particular blessing arrived sooner than they had planned. By Christmas, Abigail was expecting their first child, due in early summer. Matt's joy was boundless, his protective instincts both touching and occasionally amusing. "I can still teach," Abigail insisted when he suggested she might want to rest more. "Women have been having babies while working for centuries, Matt. I'm not ill." He conceded, though he made sure she had help with the heavier chores and insisted on driving her to and from the schoolhouse in bad weather. Their son, William James Xavier, was born on a warm June evening in 1877, with Mrs. Caldwell and the town midwife in attendance. Matt paced the porch throughout Abigail's labor, alternatively praying and cursing, until the midwife called him in to meet his son. "He's perfect," Matt whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with awe. "Abigail, you're magnificent." Watching her husband and son together, Abigail felt a completeness she had never known. Her life, once so uncertain, so defined by loss and betrayal, had become rich with love and purpose. William, or Will as they called him, grew into a sturdy, curious toddler with Matt's gray eyes and Abigail's auburn hair. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Eleanor Margaret, whose arrival coincided with the expansion of the Xavier Ranch to include an additional 500 acres purchased from a neighboring property. Calistoga grew as well, the railroad finally reaching the town in 1880, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Abigail's school expanded to a proper building with 2 classrooms and another teacher to assist her. Matt's cattle operation thrived, establishing the Xavier brand as one of the most respected in the territory. There were hard times too, a drought that nearly ruined them in 83, a winter so harsh in 85 that they lost a quarter of the herd, Matt's broken leg that left him bedridden for months in 87. Through it all, their partnership remained strong, their love deepening with each challenge overcome together. In the spring of 1890, Wyoming prepared for statehood, a milestone celebrated throughout the territory. Abigail, now 35 and mother to 3 children, Will, Eleanor, and 4-year-old Robert, found herself increasingly involved in the women's suffrage movement that had taken strong root in Wyoming. "We've had the vote in this territory since '69, she explained to her students during a lesson on civics. Wyoming women were the first in the nation to have that right, and as we become a state, we will maintain it. Her advocacy earned her both respect and criticism, but Matt supported her unequivocally. "My wife has more sense in her little finger than most men have in their entire bodies," he told a business associate who questioned the wisdom of female suffrage. "Why shouldn't she have a say in how the country is run?" On a warm evening in July of that year, just days after Wyoming officially became the 44th state, Matt and Abigail sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. 15 years, Matt said, taking her hand in his, "since I found you at that county line." "The best 15 years of my life," Abigail replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever wonder about him, Thomas?" It was a name rarely spoken between them. Abigail considered the question. "Sometimes, not with regret, but with a strange sort of gratitude. His worst act led me to my greatest happiness." Matt nodded, understanding. "I heard a rumor last time I was in Cheyenne. A man matching his description was arrested for fraud in San Francisco. Apparently, he'd been swindling wealthy widows." "That sounds like Thomas," Abigail said without rancor, "always looking for the easy path. Unlike my wife, who never shies away from hard work or difficult conversations." He kissed her temple. "I'm a lucky man, Abigail Xavier. And I'm a fortunate woman." She gazed at their children while helping Alina build a fort of sticks, little Robert toddling after them determinedly. "More fortunate than I ever dreamed possible that day, you found me dusty and desperate, clutching a rock for protection." Matt laughed at the memory. "You looked ready to brain me with it if I made one wrong move." "I was terrified," she admitted, "but something about you made me trust you even then. And now I trust you with everything I am." She turned to face him, the love of 15 years shining in her eyes. "Thank you for stopping that day, for saying I'd cross the county line with you." "Best decision I ever made," Matt replied, drawing her close for a kiss that, even after all these years, still made her heart race. As darkness fell over the Xavier Ranch, stars appearing one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From abandoned and desperate to beloved and essential, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined that fateful day at the county line. She had crossed that boundary not just physically but metaphorically, from fear to courage, from abandonment to belonging, from heartbreak to a love deeper and truer than anything she had known before. And as Matt's arm tightened around her shoulders, as their children's laughter floated on the evening air, as the lights of their home glowed warmly against the gathering night, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that every step of the journey had been worth it. For this was where she was meant to be. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had crossed that county line to find.